Not everyone implicated at the Truth and Reconciliation Commission will be prosecuted, but the National Prosecuting Authority is still dealing with several cases linked to apartheid-era crimes, including the murder of the Cradock Four. Joining me now for this conversation is legal analyst, advocate Benedict Phiri. Advocate Phiri, good morning. Thank you for joining us. Those words, not all cases will be prosecuted, is not the words that many family members certainly wanted to hear.
Absolutely. And just to clarify, I'm not an advocate, I'm a practicing attorney. But, I think that is extremely disappointing to hear the words that not everybody who did not receive amnesty or did not come clean as part of the TRC process will be prosecuted. Of course, apartheid was a crime against humanity. It is a serious crime even under the prescripts of international law. And those that participated in it and gave effect to this atrocious and pernicious system should actually be brought to book. And it's disappointing to see the NPA say not everybody will be brought to book.
Now let's unpack why possibly the NPA would choose that route.
I think there's certainly a few issues around that. There's issues of capacity, which we have come to know very well about the NPA. It's not a lie that they are incapacitated and do not have the requisite amount of skill and people to bring about prosecutions just generally within the country with success. Secondly, I think it is a delicate political situation for them. We did hear, for instance, in the Rodriguez case that former NPA head Bulelani Ngcuka had testified under oath that there was political pressure not to give effect to all these apartheid prosecutions. So I think there is a bit of pressure that we'd like to get to understand. And it may be that this commission of inquiry that is being mooted around what is actually happening may give us answers. But I think more than anything, I think it's disappointing for the head of the NPA to actually not articulate what the reasons would be satisfactorily and just literally just bury her head in the sand on this.
Now, what about private prosecution, if you will? Can individual families of those affected use that as an alternative means of finding justice? Or does the NPA have to be involved?
I think private prosecution is certainly an avenue. It obviously does require the NPA to grant a certificate that they will not prosecute before an individual can actually proceed with that. I think there are other avenues available. You will recall at the time that Azapo brought a case brought a lawsuit trying to set aside the establishment of the TRC, and particularly the fact that amnesty would not grant recourse to those that were affected. I think the arguments that they raised are potentially still valid. South Africa still has obligations under international law to deal with human rights abuses of this nature, to deal with crimes against humanity, which apartheid is. And I think, it is open to litigants that would want to tackle the non-movement by the NPA to fashion an action along those lines, to say that, in fact, South Africa is obliged to make sure that those that were not granted amnesty are actually brought to book, because that's what international law requires.
Now, Benedict, if the Commission of Inquiry, if the TRC, if they want a Commission of Inquiry to investigate the shortcomings of the TRC, is this not just the mechanics of buying time? How long will that commission work?
I agree with you. I think, in reality, the NPA has to really just say, we either prosecuting or not, and give reasons for not prosecuting when they're not prosecuting. I don't believe we're going to get any more elucidation around who was bearing political pressure on Bulelani Ngcuka not to prosecute and whether that's continuing. I think, Advocate Batohi probably has to be a little bit more braver around some of these cases. There is a lot of hurt and pain for South Africans. The system we don't understand yet. And there is value in bringing these trials. We saw with the Basson trial, Dr. Death and Prime Evil, those two trials, how much truth was actually unearthed, more than what actually came in the TRC. And that actually shed a greater light on the systematic abuse by the government of the time, whereas the TRC really didn't delve into what was actually happening. What we got was, a feeling that there were just rogue elements within the government, when that's actually not the truth. So I do not believe a commission of inquiry is going to help us. It is actually just going to waste time and resources. What we do need is the courage to tackle this head on for the sake of the country.
Now, let me ask you this, your opinion on why Advocate Batoyi would want to carry on and prosecute these cases as opposed to passing the buck, so to speak.
These are atrocious crimes. They are atrocious crimes, and we cannot think about them in the same way that we think about crime in this country on an everyday basis. What happened in apartheid is atrocious, and it was in violation of international legal prescripts. This is something that must be brought to book. We cannot let gross human rights violations, we can't sweep that under the carpet. That for me is sufficient, that those that have not been granted amnesty should actually be brought to book, including those in respect of the Cradock Four that you mentioned earlier.
So one would assume, again, speaking about the Cradock Four and the fact that there was a deadline that the NPA themselves had spoken about, I think that was December the 2nd, if I'm not mistaken. In fact, that has come and gone. Is that not an indication of this unwillingness to go ahead and prosecute?
I think it is absolutely an indication of the unwillingness, which is not acceptable, because the NPA has had more than sufficient time. Tomorrow is the 25th anniversary of the Constitution. They have had more than sufficient time to fashion these cases, to find the evidence, to make them winnable. In the Cradock Four, in fact, even the families have directed them to relevant witnesses and evidentiary material that would make these cases winnable. So to have the NPA miss its own deadline and have the answer that they are still investigating, I think is just an indication that there really is no will to bring these cases across the line.
And finally, Benedict, before we let you go, the fact that the NPA has come out and said that they lack capacity to prosecute a number of crimes or a number of cases, what does that speak to, certainly when we talk about the levels of corruption that we are witnessing in this country?
Personally, as a lawyer, it speaks to a lack of independence for the NPA from their political bosses effectively, because I think the system is such that, the NPA is sitting very squarely within the Department of Justice. It means that, budgetary cuts, staffing decisions, all of these things that are required for the degree and requisite independence that's required from an NPA are not there. I think we certainly have to look at the proposals that people like Accountability Now are making through Parliament, etc. For instance, for a super corruption busting Chapter 9 institution that sits very independently from the other arms of government. I think the way that these institutions sit within government is really hobbling on their independence and their ability to do work effectively, including dealing with corruption, which is quite rampant in this country effectively.
Now, will the powers that be support a new Chapter 9 institution if they're not prepared to let go or empower the NPA?
The Accountability Now debate has been going, if my memory serves me correctly, since about 2011, right? So that is indicative of the fact that there actually is no support for this. The portfolio committee on the debate notes around this just yesterday basically saying that there's enough institutions. to deal with this, and we should look at capacitating those institutions. But we know these institutions have been decapacitated. You know, we know what happened under the Jacob Zuma years. We know what happened to the Scorpions and the Hawks. We know what has been happening in the NPA. We heard yesterday that there are a number of senior officials in the NPA who are accused of corruption and are still within their roles. You know, that all serves to hobble and cripple such important institutions and show us that the powers that be are actually not interested about strengthening these institutions for the sake of the country.
Benedict Phiri is a legal analyst. Thank you for your time this morning and packing that yesterday. Not everyone implicated. The Truth and Reconciliation Commission will be prosecuted.